Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jane Hewitt and I'm the Capability Building Coordinator at Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand are part of the Info Exchange Group, a not-for-profit social enterprise that tackles the biggest social challenges through the smart and creative use of technology. And for those of you who haven't attended a webinar session with us before, Connecting Up and TechSoup facilitate an annual training calendar of online webinars, workshops, boot camps and webcons to help the social sector upskill in all things digital. And you can check out our events calendar coming up for events coming up this year online. So welcome today to the webinar Effective and Productive Hybrid Teams with Rebecca Sassine from Beaker and Flint. And before we begin, we'll just start with a bit of housekeeping. All lines are muted, so if you have any technical issues, please type them into the questions box on your GoToWebinar panel and I should be able to assist. Likewise, if you have any questions during the session, please also type these into the questions box and we'll have a Q&A session coming up towards the end of today's webinar. If you're on a Wi-Fi connection and have any multiple programs open, please just close any programs that you're not using to get the best possible quality of sound and video. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and you'll receive a copy of the slides and the recording towards the end of today. And just before we start, I'd like to remind people that there's a short survey that pops up at the end of today's webinar and we'd really appreciate any feedback. So that's all from me. I will pass over to Rebecca to get things started.
Cool. Thanks very much, Jane, and welcome everyone. So we're here to talk about effective and productive hybrid teams, and no doubt everyone's been hearing a lot about hybrid teams, so hopefully this will dispel some of the myths and give you some information of what to think about when you are setting up a hybrid environment in your organization. So firstly, I would like to begin in the spirit of reconciliation by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. I pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. So firstly, who are we and why are we here talking to you about hybrid? So we are Beaker and Flint, and I guess me at this point, consultants in product strategy and service design, and we really want to leave every organization we work with better as a result. So that's across everything we do. We also get involved in agile transformations. I'm a lead agile consultant at Beaker and Flint at the moment, and we were founded in 2017 and based in Melbourne. So what are we covering? So a few things. We'll probably get to about 45 minutes in through all this content and then have question time. If you do have any questions across anything I'm sharing, please just type it into the box at any time. Feel free to interrupt. So we're going to go through what is a hybrid working. I guess it's the new buzzword, but what actually is it? Why is it important? So why do we care? How to enable hybrid teams, facilitation considerations, and practical tips. So firstly, what is hybrid working? So we've got styles of working. We've got fully remote on one side, which is where everybody works remotely. And then on the other hand, we've got fully co-located, which I guess cast your mind back to 2019, and that's what a lot of offices were. So they had people in the office, so in the same space at the same time, the majority of the time. You've then got something like co-located first, so that might be a flexible working policy, but it's likely that you're going to have some people working remotely at some times, and that's okay. And then you've got remote first, which is where most people work away from the office at some time, but there is an office environment that people can go to if they need to collaborate. Hybrid working falls in the middle of this. So it's not remote first, it's not co-located first, it's somewhere between these. So it is flexible working, but it's not knowing that most people will show up to the office at most times or most people will be remote. It's somewhere in the middle depending on your organization and what that organizational policy is and how things are going, let's be honest, with COVID. So what does this look like in real life? So we've got a few different scenarios of what hybrid working could look like. And it could look like scenario 1 on Monday, but it could look like scenario 2 on Tuesday. So lots of differences. So you're looking at the same amount of people, remote and in the same office, You're also looking at, you might have boardrooms dialing in or meeting rooms. So a lot of people in one room dialing in and a few people remote. You could also have few people remote, people in the same office, and then again, boardrooms, but from really different locations. And then you could just have remote in the office, but the balance is different. More people remote, less people in the office. So why is it important? So why do we even care what hybrid is? Looking at a PwC study, so they did this study, I think towards the end of last year, the start of this year. So it's Hopes and Fears 2021. And they surveyed 32,500 people across 19 countries. And overall, across those 19 countries, they found that 72% of workers want a mix of remote and in-person working. If we drill that down further and we look at Australia, it was 90% of Australians want to keep working from home in some capacity. And that's likely because we have a very strong knowledge workforce. So we have people that have found that they can work effectively from home, sometimes even more effectively, as they don't have the interruptions that come with being in an office environment. So that's, I guess that just says it's not going away. So hybrid is going to be what a lot of workplaces need to do, because that's what the people who work at those workplaces are going to demand moving forward. People now know that they can have a far more flexible work-life balance and want to keep that. So then now that we know what hybrid is and why it remains important, now we look at how we can enable hybrid teams to work the best. So it's really two different tracks. So first we'll look at people and then at technology. Probably everyone can identify with this, that people are the best and people are also the worst, and it changes day to day. And we also have to recognize that people are the best and worst depending on what's going on in their lives as well, what's hitting them in terms of change, what's changing in their work, if we're in lockdown or out of lockdown, very variable. And something like hybrid working is very new. So the fact that we were all thrust directly into remote working was also very new. And I think it was potentially slightly easy because everyone was in the same boat. Now, when we look at hybrid, people are in all different scenarios. So something that I might be experiencing could be different than a friend of mine who works at a different office. So it really depends organization to organization now. Everyone's finding their feet and figuring out what they're going to do with this new way of working and how they're going to support the people who are the employees. So because it's so different, there's not an established or proven best practice. So a lot of companies might do flexible working well, but what they're doing might not apply to other companies or organizations. So it's a matter of relearning how to work together and how to do it effectively in this new environment of hybrid. And there also has to be new tools and processes that are going to enable the teams best. And thinking again to hybrid, I guess remote as well, we've seen that people have been sent home. People are now more in charge of their own motivation than typically they have been previously in an office environment when there's a lot of other people around them. So people need to be motivated to maintain their workload, to be able to do effective work, and to be able to do the best work that they can, and to want to continue working for the organization that they work for. So there's three key pieces that people need to be motivated. So they need autonomy, and this is a big one, particularly for leaders who I guess are used to managing more, especially not being able to see your employees. Huge. But trusting and encouraging team members to take ownership of their own work and their own skill development really is going to be very important to allow people to continue the freedom that they found in remote working as they switch into hybrid working. We also have people requiring mastery. So people want to be an expert at what they know. They really want to upskill. They want to be the best at that. They want to keep pushing forward and keep learning. So providing learning potential and the tools required so that your employees can gain that mastery is also really important. And the last one is purpose. So making sure that people have purpose in their work. So why are they doing the work they're doing? Why are they spending so much time on this work? Because most people spend more time at work than they do with their families, for example. So making sure that team members connect to those the work serves and benefits, and making sure they know why they're doing it, what their purpose is, and how it ladders up to the organizational goals is also really important. Something that can help with this is a hybrid team social contract. So this is an example of an artifact that can be used in an organization to draw teams together to help them find their purpose through mission and purpose and goals and objectives, and also to let them start to connect to the purpose behind the work and the people that work affects, so the internal and external stakeholders. It also brings a team together in terms of listing out their team values and norms. So those are the ways, in making it really explicit, that a team collaborates, which is more important when you don't know necessarily where people might be. Back in 2019, we might have known that Tom sat at the corner desk and you could just walk up to him at any time. But in the new world, so in remote, you also knew he was always on Microsoft Teams, or he might have been on WebEx. Now, in the new world, he might be at the corner desk on a Thursday and every second Tuesday, and then he's on WebEx or MS Teams. Like, where are people? So it's really important to start to nut out the values and norms for how we interact and how we collaborate. And this is something a team would fill out together and would come back and visit, because it's never just one and done. And facilitating or running one of these sessions, also super simple. So you really need to have a good space, and that could be a virtual space or a space altogether. But you need the team to be comfortable and ready to have an open and supportive discussion. It's best to have a facilitator, preferably one that's not on the team, but sometimes that's challenging. So anyone on the team, it doesn't have to be a leader or a manager, anyone on the team can come and run this session. It's time and space to talk, so carving out some time to fully focus on getting this artifact completed and having the conversation as a team. And an inclusive tool or resource that allows everyone to contribute. We talk a little more about collaborative tools later, but it's really, really important that we have somewhere that everyone feels they can contribute to, whether they're in an office or the same co-located space, or if they're working remotely. And we also have a template. So like was on the previous slide, that is just to start, not to end with. The team may want to make changes to that. So that was a look at people. Now we're moving into technology. Most importantly, that works for people. So the very first comment I'd make is that technology is an enabler of change. It's not a driver of change. While it does work as a lever for change, it needs to enable the change for the people. We've come up with 4 main categories. So most critical to have in place, which probably everyone realized when they moved to remote, but also really important and may need some changes coming out of remote to hybrid, to look at all of these and consider, how does what you have remain fit for purpose in a hybrid world? So the first category is management and reporting. So this is really around planning the work, managing, tracking, and reporting on the work. So for example, it could be Kanban boards. So that might be something on Trello. It could be something on Jira. It could be project plans and Gantt charts. It could simply be Excel documents that are shared with all on SharePoint, so anyone can access from wherever they are. Something like QuickTime as well. Or it could be something custom made for your organization. So it's thinking about, what are the tools your team relies on to keep track of what work needs to be done and when. And thinking about this in terms of, can everyone access these at all times? Does everyone know where these tools are? Does everyone have logins to these tools, or be able to access them through VPN or however the security works for that? And will the tools remain fit for purpose in a hybrid working environment? So is there parity between those that are sitting in the office and those that are in a remote environment? And thinking further, are there any remote learnings you can take on board? So you might have set it up really well for remote. So what can you carry forward for hybrid, and will it keep working for hybrid? Next, we look at what is probably the most important out of all, especially moving into remote and then moving out of that into hybrid, is communication and collaboration. So these are the tools used to interact and ideate with each other. So examples are email, could be Zoom, Asana and Slack, Microsoft Teams, WebEx, Skype, instant messaging, digital whiteboards. There's things like Miro and Mural. There are a lot of tools out there, and even more after 2020. So when people are not physically co-located, which is going to be the state for hybrid working, what tools will you use to bridge the physical distance to communicate and collaborate effectively? So it's about bridging the physical distance. So how can you continue to bring people together to communicate and collaborate when they aren't together, when they're in a virtual space? So the tools that you have, are these fit for purpose in a hybrid working environment? Can people who are co-located, so people all together in a boardroom, and people who are remotely located, can they all collaborate together using these tools? And what are the limits of the tools you currently use? And will these limits prohibit you and your teams from working effectively? Probably the most important tip I'd give on this one is get feedback from those who use it. Communication and collaboration needs to happen, and it needs to keep people engaged so that they remain motivated. But if you're hearing a lot of feedback that something isn't working, or this might be better, or that might be better, have a way to track that feedback and potentially implement change. Third, we move on to knowledge management. So this is storing information, data, and documentation. And we saw a lot of companies and organizations that needed to get better at this immediately. When everyone was sent home, everyone needed ways to be able to access information to be able to get their work done. So that might be looking back at previous information. It might be being able to access SharePoint from home, getting past firewalls or VPNs, getting into Microsoft Teams. We're looking at things like Confluence as well, and DocuSign, Dropbox, and unfortunately paper records. However, it was really nice. I've been working in government recently, and it was nice to see that going paper free had been a drive of theirs, and COVID basically pushed this to the top of the list. And they're going to try and remain paper free as much as possible as they move back to hybrid. So thinking about with these tools, when working remotely, do we have access to all of the information we require to get our work done effectively? So this also slightly ties back to the communication and collaboration, because if we think about information, some of that is in other people's heads. Some of that is simply knowledge that other people hold. So do we have the tools to get us in touch with other people quickly, effectively, so that we can continue to do our work? Secondly, are we effectively archiving the work that we do in a way that makes our lives easier in the future? So is there some method, is there some kind of schema or information architecture for how information is archived? And lastly, again, as we're asking for all of them, do these tools remain fit for purpose in a hybrid working environment? And lastly, we're looking at business as usual. So this is actually doing the work. So the rest are really circling around the work. So we're tracking the work, we're seeing what the work actually is, we're visualizing it somewhere, we're communicating and collaborating on the work, we're making sure that we've got the information we need to complete it. But business as usual is doing the work. So tools we use to get our work done. So for a lot of people, that's something like Microsoft Word, It's Google Docs, it's developer tools, Okta Identity Management, MS365, and it could also be custom tools that are just for your function, department, or organization. It could be internal tools that you're using. So again, same deal is that if you're not in the office, do you have all the tools you need? Can you access all those tools easily? Do you have to reboot your computer 4 times before you get to those tools? How much time is taken trying to access the tools outside of the office as opposed to inside of the office? And secondly, looking around accessibility issues. So sometimes we need to take into account that people will have issues accessing things or will need more accessibility. So do the tools cater to this? And will they continue to cater it whether people are within an office environment or working remotely? And lastly, this scans across all of them, but are there any security issues? So this was a big thing when a lot of people got sent home from call centers, was how can you secure people's data so that you still align to security policies and privacy policies, but keep the employees safe so that they can work in a place that's safe for them. So thinking through security issues and making sure that when people do go back to the office, things aren't changed that make people working remotely have a way harder time doing their work. So next we have hybrid meeting facilitation and some practical tips as well. So hybrid meetings, this is all about creating inclusion in hybrid meetings. But the first thing is that hybrid meetings are very different from simply remote meetings, where everyone is all one box on a screen, and very different from everyone in the same place meetings. So it's another layer of complexity to have some people here and some people there. And the idea is that they're parity for all people who are on that meeting or that session, whatever it may be, trying to create parity and inclusion so that everyone feels that they're being valuable, that they're creating value and receiving value by spending their time there. So it can be a challenge because for the people in the office environment, there's more of a sense of a belonging. They're getting more non-verbal communication. They're getting more feedback from each other. They can see things that the people who are on screens can't see. And it just doesn't exist with the people who are remote. But there's some simple guidelines to try and bridge the gap between remote and co-located attendees. So the first thing is to check if there's a need for a meeting room. So potentially everyone in the office can attend from their desks, and that'll provide parity for all. So everyone is still on a screen one-to-one. Second thing is for facilitators to greet everyone by name, and if possible, encourage the use of cameras, even for those in a meeting room. So for example, everyone in the meeting room could bring their laptop, set it up, turn it on mute and use the meeting room technology, but just to make sure that everyone can see everyone else's faces, can see the non-verbal feedback and has parity in that regard. For hybrid meetings, it's really important to set ground rules. So similar to the housekeeping you heard earlier, and reiterate the purpose, agenda, and outcomes. So why are we here in this meeting? What's happening? What's our outcome? What are we going to do together? We also want to ensure at the beginning that if there's a shared screen, everyone can see it and everyone can hear what they're meant to be hearing. And also providing a way for non-verbal feedback. So again, in the same way that there was housekeeping at the beginning, and we said, great, use the chat box, feel free to pop anything in there at any time. Or usually the platform that's in use, whether that's WebEx, that could be Teams, it could be Zoom, it will have very similar functionality. There's a chat box, or there's functionality like emojis and reactions. So making sure that everyone's across how to use those. Thinking through as well that if you're in the office, so if you're one of the ones who's co-located and you point at something within that room, people cannot see what you're pointing at if they're not in that room and if the camera isn't very good in that room. Just making sure that's kept in mind. Also making time for everyone to contribute and being remote first in asking for feedback. And making time is thinking about the fact that instead of just talking immediately the way you would if you're co-located. You have to find a mute button if you're not. You have to struggle with technology. You've got a slightly higher barrier to contribute, and that might hold people back. So making sure there's time for that and asking people by name if they're remote for feedback. Again, this ladder's down, but building in additional pause time. So let attendees find their mute buttons. And being sensitive to subtle cues. And this might be simple as having a co-facilitator who's checking to see if someone might have come off mute. So that's a really good symbol. It's like non-verbal, but someone might want to say something. So having someone that's checking in on that if you feel you can't, as well as presenting the meeting and facilitating. And not talking over the top of people. Really important for things like automated subtitles. So still on hybrid meetings, there are some organizational considerations as well. So for those that are providing meeting room technology or involved in those decisions, here's some considerations for the meeting rooms. And also for the people who are working remotely, meeting from wherever they are. So the first thing is providing remote workers a seat at the table. So again, whether that's everyone having laptops and being able to see them, making sure there's some kind of video screen in the room if possible, but otherwise the laptops can really address that. So there might not be the need for a big, massive, expensive setup in a meeting room, might be able to do that just with the technology people already have. It's considering a work from home technology kit, so potentially buying things in bulk, and being able to send things home with people so that you know they're going to have good audio, they're going to have the best video that their bandwidth can give them. They might need to have certain other setups, lighting or so on, but just making sure that everyone has parity in that regard. And ensuring the office bandwidth, particularly as we move to hybrid, so people go back to work, ensuring the office bandwidth can provide quality audio and video. And making sure, and this is really important, there's easy to use technology. So whilst most of us are familiar with a lot of technology, it's still new for a lot of people. They haven't had to really work like this. If they were in an office, they know how to use the printer, the photocopier, the coffee machine, and that might have been the extent of it. They can turn their laptops on and off, they can open Word, that's what they know how to do. So easy to use technology is going to be really key to get people using it effectively. And having the same technology running for remote and co-located is very important. So if everyone uses MS Teams on their laptops and wherever they're meeting from remotely, then having that technology in the meeting rooms as well is going to be really important so that everyone's meeting at the same place. And if you are going to be putting in changes, so taking feedback, putting in changes, providing informational roadmaps on what's happening next in terms of the technology. So letting people know that if they're unhappy with something, changes are coming. And that will usually quieten down a lot of the detractors. There's also the need to communicate about the technology available and involving those who are champions. So in your organization, you might have 4 to 5 people, maybe more, maybe less, who are really good at using the technology and quite passionate about it because they see how great it is to be able to work flexibly. They want it to continue, and they're really happy to put time into helping create resource center, go-to guides, how-to videos, just to make sure that this trend continues and that working flexibly is still allowed because it's simple and everyone's happy to do it. And then lastly, it's about listening to the common complaints. So I did raise this earlier, but it's really about using these to implement improvements. Complaints are the greatest thing you're going to get in terms of being able to pivot, to change, to know what to improve next. And just some practical tips. So being 100% on site is an exception now, especially in a hybrid environment. As we've seen from the 90% of Australians that don't want to return full time to the office, and I'm sure everyone's organisation is experiencing the same thing, it's going to be an exception. And number 2, flexibility is going to be the new norm. And being consistent with the tools chosen is really important, just so people do know, if I'm dialing into a meeting, we always use this platform. Involving employees in the planning, also important, just so they feel heard, they feel on board, and they're more likely to come along with any kind of change. And providing ways for them to give and receive feedback to allow them to continue to feel empowered and like they're having a say. It's making practices, norms, and expectations explicit. This is not just down to the technology used, it's looking at, if it is a requirement that people should be in the office at least 1 day a week, it's making sure that that is explicit. It's making sure that the norms and the new practices are known by everyone and start to become embedded and then start to become part of the culture. But before all that happens, people need to know what the practices, norms, and expectations are. It's understanding that micro communications are now the key mode of interaction. So this was somewhat true. When people would meet in the hallway, they might have a chat, they might meet at the kettle in the kitchen and have a chat. So they're micro communications, but those have now been taken virtually and need to almost stay there if hybrid is going to succeed. So knowing that those are going to become a key mode, so the collaborative tools that your company has need to support this. It's also being a leader in communicating. So this is making sure that you are using those micro communication platforms, you are using the collaboration platforms, you're making sure that any change is communicated out. You're using the tools that your company has. So maybe the portals, they might be using Yammer, they might be using SharePoint sites, but using those and making sure that people can get the information they need. And it's ensuring that remote practices that worked really well are not left behind as we move into hybrid. So recording company meetings for people who can't make it, making sure that that's still posted kind of immediately after the meeting happens. Those remote practices that have served really well and that have resonated with employees in your organization, it's very important to continue doing those, even as some people move back to the office. It's recognizing verbal communication will now take precedence over non-verbal. So this is important, and this is again part of providing parity between people who are online together, same room, co-located, and people who are remote online. And it's that things are now verbal, particularly if you're working in an organization with culture, is that the cameras aren't on. Everything is verbal now. And lastly, I think it's tempering expectations and knowing that everything is not in your control. And there will be, this is obviously we do kind of risks, risk management, so on, mitigations, but there are still things that are going to sit outside your control, particularly the people of the organization, the policies that are being made, the government shutting things down. There's a lot of things that are outside control. So coming to the end, because we sped through that actually, there's some resources that it would be great for you to get your hands on. So if you register at Connecting Up, there's hundreds of free or discounted products that will definitely help across those areas we talked about. And as you're moving back to hybrid, will be very valuable. So there's a few links there and you'll be getting the deck after this. And if you had more questions or thoughts, there are expert bar sessions that will be coming up. So the site isn't quite up yet, but you can email InfoExchange to ask for a session. So that's when you get one-on-one with a Beaker & Flint consultant, and we've done hybrid working enablement across several organizations. So happy to talk to you. And that was it. So as with everything in life, hybrid working takes time to learn and master. So we will not be experts from day one. So any questions? I don't think I've seen any pop into the chat. That's fine. It is a very cold and wintry Tuesday. So I can see that everyone might be a little slower this morning. I know I am. So I'll give it a minute if anyone has a question. Otherwise, that is a wrap.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was great. And as I just mentioned at the beginning, I'll be sending a copy of the slides and the recording towards the end of today. And I'll include those links as well, just so people can access them from the email, and a bit more information about the Digital Transformation Hub and when that's going live, which will be next month sometime. I think there is a page up at the moment, but I'll just include the link for that as well. So thank you very much, Rebecca. And thank you everybody for joining us today. That was very useful. If anybody does have any questions, feel free to reach out to me and I will pass any questions along to Rebecca.
Cool.
Cool.
Thanks very much.
Have a great day, everybody. Thanks once again.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye. Cheers.